Welcome back to Unseen Ocean History. Wherever you are right now, let your body sink a little heavier into the bed beneath you. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. And let's begin the way we always begin, with the breath. Take one slow breath in through your nose, filling your chest gently, without force. Hold it there, just for a moment, quiet, still, and release it slowly through your mouth, like a wave pulling back from the shore. Again, breathe in slowly and out slowly. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. Just this breath, and the next one, and the one after that. Let's move gently through your body the way we always do before we go down into the water. Start with your jaw. Notice if it's clenched, even slightly, and let it loosen. Let your teeth part, just a little. Let your tongue rest heavy at the bottom of your mouth. Move to your shoulders. They carry so much all day, every day. Let them drop away from your ears, heavier, looser, like wet sand settling after a wave has passed over it. Now your hands. Uncurl your fingers if they're curled. Let your palms open, face up or down, whatever feels natural. Let them go completely still. And your breathing, slow, even, unhurried, in through the nose, out through the mouth like the tide, which never rushes, which has never once been in a hurry, not in 4 billion years. Good. Tonight we're going somewhere very old and very strange and very deep. Tonight we are going to the place where the ocean has kept one of its most famous secrets, a stretch of warm blue water between Miami, Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, a triangle of sea that pilots and sailors have spoken of in careful voices for over 100 years. You already know its name, the Bermuda Triangle. Ships that left port and never arrived, planes that vanished from radar with no distress call, compasses that spun in place, pointing at nothing or everything, all at once. We are going to drift slowly across that legend tonight, not to be frightened by it, but to understand it, gently, factually, the way the ocean itself would explain it if the ocean could speak. And beneath that legend we are going somewhere real, somewhere measured, mapped, and confirmed by decades of oceanographic surveys, down into the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest trench in the entire Atlantic Ocean and deeper than any hole ever dug by human hands, deeper, in places, than Mount Everest is tall. At its lowest point, called the Milwaukee Deep, the trench reaches down more than 8,300 meters, over 5 miles beneath the waves you are picturing right now. We will go there slowly, 100 meters at a time, one breath at a time. And by the time we arrive, you will likely already be asleep, which is exactly how this is supposed to go. So let's begin. Breathe in slowly, hold, and out. Let your body go still and quiet and heavy, and let's go down into the water, into the legend, and into the deepest scar in the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Picture the surface first, before we sink beneath it. Warm, turquoise near the beaches of Florida, deepening to sapphire further out, past the shallow banks of the Bahamas, past the pale sand of Bermuda's shoreline, out toward the open Atlantic, where the color turns almost black with depth. The water here is famously calm on the surface, gentle swells, trade winds moving lazily across it. Nothing about the way it looks would ever suggest a mystery. And that in a strange way, is part of why the legend took hold so easily. A place this beautiful, this calm, swallowing ships and planes without a sound, without wreckage, without warning. We are not here tonight to be frightened by that. We are here to rest inside it, to let the old stories drift past us like driftwood while we look calmly at what the ocean and its scientists have actually found. Let your shoulders drop again. They may have crept back up while you were listening. That's all right. Just let them fall one more time, heavier than before. Let your breathing settle into its own rhythm now. You don't need to control it anymore. Just notice it. In and out. In and out. And when you're ready, completely ready, we'll begin our descent. Down through the warm surface layer, down into the twilight, down into the trench that has been waiting patiently in the dark for longer than any legend has existed above it. Let's take our first pass down now, gently, all the way to the bottom, just to feel the shape of this journey. We'll come back up afterward and go down again, more slowly, and look more closely at everything we pass. Breathe in, slowly, and out. At 15 meters. Small schools of flying fish sometimes break the surface just above us here, gliding on wing-like fins for 100 meters or more to escape a predator below. A brief flash of silver against the sky before falling back into the water. Breathe in, slowly, and out. At 25 meters. The light is still bright, still warm, still gold-tinted, but it is beginning, very slightly, to soften at the edges, the first quiet sign of everything still to come. At 30 meters, sound travels almost 4.5 times faster through water than through air. A sound made here would reach a listener far sooner and far more clearly than the same sound would on land. The ocean has always been a world built more around sound and pressure than around sight. At 40 meters, small pods of dolphins sometimes pass through this depth in these waters, using echolocation to navigate and hunt, sending out clicks and reading the echoes that return, seeing the world through sound, the way we are learning to see it through sound tonight, in this voice, in this darkness. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go. At 60 meters, the water pressure here is already 7 times what you feel lying in your bed right now. Your body wouldn't notice the difference, not consciously, the way a fish never has to think about the weight of the water around it, simply moving through it, held gently by it. At 70 meters, Opa, sometimes called moonfish, swim at this depth in Atlantic waters, one of the only fish known to be fully warm-blooded throughout its whole body, generating its own heat by constantly flapping its pectoral fins, keeping its blood, its brain, and its eyes warmer than the surrounding water, an adaptation discovered only in 2015. At 80 meters, swordfish begin their hunting dives around this depth and continue much deeper, sometimes past 600 meters, their eyes and brains kept warm by a specialized heating organ near the eye, allowing them to hunt effectively in water cold enough to slow an ordinary fish's vision and reflexes. Breathe in, hold gently, and out. At 90 meters, the last full colors of the spectrum are fading now. Reds and oranges are already gone, absorbed many meters above us, leaving only blues and a thinning trace of green. At 110 meters, marine snow is a little more visible here now, small pale flecks catching what light remains, drifting down steadily, the way they will drift, without pause, for the rest of this entire journey. At 125 meters, a school of small silverfish moves past, tight and coordinated, thousands of individuals turning as one, a single shimmering shape with no single leader, each fish simply responding to the ones beside it. The way calm itself can move quietly from one part of the body to another. Breathe in slowly and out completely. At 140 meters, the temperature has dropped several degrees now from the surface, the water noticeably cooler, though still far from the cold that waits for us much further down. At 160 meters. This is near the lower edge of where recreational and technical divers can safely descend, the deepest boundary of direct human presence in the ocean without specialized equipment. Beyond here, for the rest of tonight's journey, this water belongs almost entirely to submersibles, remotely operated vehicles, and the animals who have always lived here. At 175 meters, let your hands go a little heavier, resting exactly where they are. At 190 meters, the blue around us is deep and dim now, more a memory of color than color itself, and in a few more meters it will give way entirely to true darkness. Breathe in slowly and out gently. At 225 meters, we are fully inside the twilight zone now, and the vertical migration we spoke of earlier is happening constantly around us. An unseen tide of billions of small creatures rising and falling with the turn of day and night, high above and below wherever we happen to be. At 250 meters, a lanternfish drifts past, its photophores glowing faintly along its belly, matching the dim light above it so precisely that a predator looking upward would see almost nothing at all, just a seamless continuation of the water itself. At 275 meters, let your breathing settle into its own rhythm again, unhurried, even, exactly as it wants to be. At 350 meters, the darkness here is complete, except for the light creatures make themselves. Scientists estimate that at least 90% of animals living at this depth and below produce their own bioluminescent light in some form, whether for camouflage, communication, or catching prey, making light. Down here, far more often a tool of biology than a gift of the sun. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out slowly. At 450 meters, fangtooth fish live at this depth and much deeper, small but fiercely built, with the largest teeth relative to body size of any fish in the ocean, so large that the fangtooth has evolved special sockets in the roof of its own mouth simply to allow it to close its jaw without impaling itself. At 550 meters, a barrel-eye fish drifts by, its transparent, fluid-filled head allowing its tubular eyes to rotate upward, watching for the silhouettes of prey directly above it through the top of its own skull, one of the strangest visual adaptations in the entire animal kingdom. At 650 meters, the Sofar Channel exists near this depth in much of the world's oceans, a layer where temperature and pressure combine to let sound travel extraordinary distances, sometimes thousands of kilometers, with very little loss of energy. Whales are believed to use this channel to communicate across entire ocean basins, a slow, deep conversation carried on a layer of water most of us will never know exists. Breathe in slowly and let it go. At 750 meters, A pod of sperm whales may be resting nearby at this depth right now, hanging vertically in the water in a behavior researchers only properly documented in the last 20 years, sleeping for short periods in an upright, motionless posture, drifting gently with the current. At 850 meters, marine snow continues here, unbroken, unhurried, each flake a tiny fragment of a life that existed far above, completing a journey that will take it eventually all the way to the trench floor, kilometers below where we are right now, at 950 meters. Let your jaw loosen again and your shoulders drop, heavier than before. At 1,100 meters, a giant squid may pass through water like this on its own hunting migrations, its enormous eyes gathering every last trace of available light, built specifically for a world where light is this rare and this precious. Breathe in, hold gently, and out slowly. At 1,300 meters, the water here has settled into the cold that will remain, almost unchanged, for the rest of the descent, a steady 2 to 4 degrees Celsius that will not shift meaningfully again until we reach the very bottom. At 1,500 meters, a black sea devil, a small and rarely seen anglerfish relative, drifts here, its body almost entirely black, absorbing what little light exists so completely that it becomes functionally invisible in the water around it. At 1,700 meters, let your whole body settle a little further into stillness, the way the seafloor itself is always settling, slowly, one particle at a time. At 1,900 meters, we are close now to the geology we spoke of earlier, the plate boundary that built this trench, still working, slowly, patiently, beneath us. Breathe in, slowly, and out, completely. At 2,200 meters, sediment cores taken from this region show clear layers of turbidite deposits, physical evidence of past underwater landslides triggered by seismic activity along the plate boundary, each layer a quiet record of one more tremor stacked over thousands of years. At 2,400 meters, a sea spider drifts across the seafloor near here, a distant relative of the small spiders on land, though far larger at this depth, its body so thin that its internal organs extend down into its long, thin legs, an adaptation to a world where surface area matters more than mass. At 2,600 meters, manganese nodules lie scattered across parts of this deep floor, small, dark, potato-shaped mineral deposits that form incredibly slowly, sometimes only a few millimeters every million years, built up in mineral-rich layers around a tiny core, patient beyond almost any human measure of patience. At 2,800 meters, breathe in slowly and let it go, gently. At 3,200 meters, brittle stars carpet sections of the abyssal floor, here in some regions, thousands of individuals per square meter in the right conditions, their thin, flexible arms sifting through sediment for the smallest edible particles. At 3,400 meters, a tripod fish rests nearby, balanced on 3 long, stiffened fin rays that lift its body slightly above the seafloor, facing into the current, waiting motionless for prey to drift within reach, a patient hunter that spends far more energy waiting than moving. At 3,600 meters, let your breathing slow further, in and out, exactly as it wants to be. At 3,800 meters, The trench walls are becoming more pronounced now, the flat plain beginning to fold downward into the true canyon shape carved by the tectonic collision beneath us. Breathe in, hold it a moment longer, and out, slowly. At 4,200 meters, a deep-sea octopus, sometimes called a Dumbo octopus, hovers just above the sediment here, its soft, gelatinous body perfectly suited to the pressure, its ear-like fins moving in slow, unhurried beats. At 4,400 meters, marine snow continues falling here, thinner now, only the toughest material surviving the long journey down from the sunlit water we left so long ago in this descent. At 4,600 meters, let your hands rest, completely still, heavier than they have been all night. At 4,800 meters, we are approaching the depth where the trench truly begins to reveal its shape, the abyssal plain giving way meter by meter to the steep walls of the canyon below. Breathe in slowly and out completely. At 5,200 meters, a blob sculpin rests on the seafloor near here in similar deep environments, its body soft and gelatinous at this pressure, though it appears, when brought to the surface by researchers, distorted and strange, a reminder that many deep-sea creatures are perfectly built for their world, and only look unusual to us because we are seeing them outside of it. At 5,400 meters, the pressure here is over 500 atmospheres, a number too large to feel meaningful, so simply let it settle, the way everything else has settled tonight, without needing to be fully understood. At 5,600 meters, let your jaw loosen once more and your whole body grow heavier, sinking gently into stillness. At 5,800 meters, we are at the very edge of the Hadal zone now, the deepest classification the ocean has, waiting just below us. Breathe in slowly and let it go. At 6,200 meters, Hadal snailfish are more common here than most people expect, thriving in numbers that surprised the first researchers to survey trenches at this depth, proof that even the most extreme layer of the ocean is not empty, simply different. At 6,400 meters, amphipods gather here in small patient groups, scavenging whatever organic material has managed to fall this far, thriving on scarcity in a way no creature on the surface world ever needs to learn. At 6,600 meters, let your breathing settle into its own slow rhythm, in and out, needing no effort at all. At 6,800 meters, the trench walls rise steeply on either side of us now, ancient rock and sediment folded by forces too slow for us to ever feel directly. Breathe in, slowly, and out completely. At 7,200 meters, some species of Hadal amphipod found in trenches like this one exist nowhere else on Earth. An entire lineage evolved in isolation, one trench at a time, each deep scar in the ocean floor, its own quiet, separate world. At 7,400 meters, marine snow is thinning now to its final, most resistant particles, the very last remnants of a fall that began weeks ago in the warm, sunlit water above the legend we spoke of at the start of tonight. At 7,600 meters, let your whole body grow heavier still, sinking gently into the bed beneath you, exactly the way sediment sinks slowly, patiently, into the trench floor below us. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly. At 7,800 meters, we are close now, closer than we have been at any point tonight, to the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. At 8,100 meters, the cold here has been constant for kilometers, unchanging, patient, the same temperature it has held for longer than any legend above us has existed. At 8,300 meters, let your breathing slow, completely, gently, in and out. And let's take the very last steps down together toward the floor of the Milwaukee Deep. We have touched the bottom once already tonight, but let's rise back to the surface now gently and take this same journey again, slower this time, so we don't miss anything the water has to show us. Breathe in slowly and out completely. Let's begin again. At the surface, 0 meters. The water is warm here, 27 degrees Celsius, maybe warmer, depending on the season. And it is some of the most beautiful open ocean on Earth. This triangle of sea, stretching roughly from Miami up to Bermuda, down to Puerto Rico and back, covers about 500,000 square miles of the Atlantic, an area larger than many countries, and for over a century, sailors and pilots have told stories about this water, stories that eventually earned it a name, the Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Let's talk about where the legend actually began, because that itself is a kind of history worth knowing calmly before we go deeper. The most famous story is Flight 19. In December of 1945, 5 US Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training mission and never returned. The flight leader reported his compasses were behaving strangely, reported he didn't know which way was west. And then, after hours of confused radio transmissions, the flight went silent. A rescue plane sent to search for them also vanished that same night. 14 men were lost with Flight 19, 13 more on the rescue plane, 27 men in a single evening over calm water with no wreckage ever found. It is a real tragedy, and it is the story that more than any other planted the legend in the American imagination. There were others before and after. The USS Cyclops, a Navy collier ship carrying over 300 crew, vanished in 1918 without a single distress call, without a single piece of wreckage, in weather that, as far as records show, was unremarkable. The Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner, was found run aground off North Carolina in 1921 with no crew aboard, food still cooking in the galley, personal belongings undisturbed, and no one has ever explained where the crew went. These stories are real. The ships and planes were real. The people lost were real, and their families waited for answers that never came. We hold that with the respect it deserves. Breathe in, hold, and out. But here is where the ocean's actual data becomes important and where we can rest a little easier in this water tonight. The United States Coast Guard, which has spent decades studying maritime disappearances in this specific region, has stated plainly, more than once, that the number of ships and planes lost in the Bermuda Triangle is not statistically higher than in any other well-traveled stretch of ocean of similar size. This is one of the busiest shipping and flight corridors on Earth. It connects the entire eastern seaboard of the United States to the Caribbean and South America. More traffic over more decades simply produces more incidents, in the same way a busy highway produces more accidents than a rural road, without the highway itself being cursed. Lloyd's of London, the insurance market that has quietly tracked maritime losses since the 1600s, has never charged higher premiums for ships crossing the Bermuda Triangle. If the risk were real in a way that couldn't be explained by ordinary causes, the people whose entire business is calculating risk would have noticed first. Let your hands go a little heavier now, resting wherever they are. So what did happen in this warm surface water to the ships and planes that never made it home? Some of it, honestly, is simple physics. This region sits inside something called the Sargasso Sea, a strange and beautiful patch of ocean defined not by land, but by 4 ocean currents that circle around it. The Gulf Stream on the west, the North Atlantic Current on the north, the Canary Current on the east, and the North Atlantic Equatorial Current on the south. Together, they create a slow clockwise gyre, and at its centre the water is unusually still, thick with floating brown sargassum seaweed, and historically very difficult to sail out of if your ship lost its wind or its engine failed. Sailors becalmed in the Sargasso Sea for weeks in the age of sail sometimes ran out of food and water long before help arrived. Their ships, still afloat, still intact, would eventually be found abandoned or never found at all, simply because they drifted silently somewhere else in an enormous ocean. The Gulf Stream itself is relevant here too. It is one of the fastest, strongest currents on the planet, moving at times faster than 4 miles an hour, carrying enormous volumes of warm water north along the American coast before curling east toward Europe. A small plane running low on fuel or a boat with engine trouble can be carried many miles off its expected course in a single hour by this current alone, which, before modern GPS, would have made a distress call's location almost useless to rescuers. And then there is the compass. Breathe in and out slowly. This is one of the most talked about pieces of the legend, and it happens to be one of the most scientifically real. Most of the Bermuda Triangle sits on or near what navigators call an agonic line, a place where true north and magnetic north align perfectly. So a compass points to the actual geographic North Pole instead of the magnetic pole, which sits hundreds of miles away in the Canadian Arctic. For a sailor or pilot who didn't know this, or who forgot to correct for it, this can cause a real and measurable navigational error. Not because the compass is broken or possessed or being interfered with by anything paranormal, but because the entire rest of the world requires you to correct for magnetic declination, and this triangle of ocean uniquely does not. A compass that seems to be pointing at nothing is often simply pointing at true north correctly, in a place where a pilot expected it to be pointing somewhere else. There is one more physical phenomenon worth mentioning here, because it connects the surface world we're floating in right now to the trench we are about to descend into: methane. Deep beneath parts of this ocean floor, methane hydrates, a frozen slush of natural gas and water, sit trapped in the sediment. Occasionally, seismic activity or slow geological shifts release large plumes of this gas, which rise through the water column. Some oceanographers have proposed that a large enough methane release reaching the surface could lower the density of the water so much that a ship could lose buoyancy and sink rapidly, and could also ignite in the air above, disrupting an aircraft engine. This remains a hypothesis tested mostly in laboratory tanks rather than the open ocean, but it is one of the more scientifically serious explanations that has ever been proposed for a Bermuda Triangle loss, and it is, fittingly, tied directly to the deep geology we are about to visit. Let your jaw loosen again. Let your breathing slow. We have only gone as deep as the surface tonight, and already we've walked through 100 years of history. Let's go further down now. Let's leave the legend on the surface where it belongs and go find the real trench underneath it. Let's stay at the surface a little longer before we go deeper. There are a few more stories worth knowing calmly because they shaped this legend as much as Flight 19 did. In 1948, a British airliner called the Star Tiger vanished on a flight from the Azores to Bermuda. 31 people aboard, no distress call, no wreckage ever recovered, in conditions that pilots at the time described as calm. A year later, almost to the day, its sister aircraft, the Star Ariel, vanished on a flight from Bermuda to Jamaica. 20 passengers and crew lost, again without a distress call, again without wreckage. 2 aircraft from the same small fleet, lost within a year of each other over the same stretch of ocean, is precisely the kind of coincidence that turns a series of tragedies into a legend. Breathe in, slowly, and out. In 1963, a tanker called the Marine Sulphur Queen, carrying a cargo of molten sulphur, vanished somewhere between Texas and Virginia, passing through the edge of the triangle. A Coast Guard investigation afterward concluded the ship likely suffered a structural failure, its hull weakened by corrosion from the sulphur cargo it carried, and simply broke apart and sank quickly in what was otherwise unremarkable weather. This is one of the clearer cases where a mundane, mechanical explanation exists, documented in an official investigation, and yet the ship's name still appears on almost every list of Bermuda Triangle mysteries, because structural failure from cargo corrosion is a far less compelling story than vanished without explanation. That same year, 2 US Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker aircraft collided and crashed during a training exercise over this region. This one has an explanation almost immediately available, a mid-air collision confirmed by wreckage and survivors, and yet it is still frequently listed simply as 2 planes lost in the Bermuda Triangle, stripped of the context that would resolve it entirely. Breathe in, hold, and out, slowly. There's a pattern worth noticing in nearly all of these stories, and it's worth sitting with gently here at the surface before we go down. The ocean is enormous, and shipping and flight records from the middle of the 20th century were far less complete than they are now. Radar coverage over open ocean was limited or non-existent in many of these decades. Searches for wreckage, especially in deep water, were slow, difficult, and often unsuccessful even when investigators knew roughly where to look. An aircraft or ship going down in a storm or from mechanical failure or from simple human error in the middle of the Atlantic in the 1940s, 50s or 60s was often never found. Not because the ocean here is unusual, but because finding anything in deep, open ocean has always been extraordinarily difficult everywhere, at every point in maritime history. The writer who is most often credited with turning these scattered incidents into a single-named legend, Vincent Gaddis, published his account in 1964, and a best-selling book on the subject followed in 1974. These books grouped decades of unrelated incidents with unrelated causes into a single narrative, and in doing so created something far more compelling and far more lasting than any one individual story could have been on its own. Let your shoulders drop again, heavier this time. None of this is meant to erase the real losses. The families of Flight 19, of the Star Tiger, of the Cyclops, waited for answers that mostly never came. And that grief is real regardless of what caused it. But it does mean that we can rest tonight in this water, knowing that the ocean beneath us is not uniquely hungry, uniquely cursed, or uniquely dangerous. It is simply old and vast, and in places still not fully explored, which is a very different kind of mystery than the one the legend tells. Breathe in slowly and let it go completely. Now, let's continue down into the golden water toward the Twilight Zone. Let's return one final time to the surface legend before we begin our full ascent, because a few of its most famous threads deserve a closer, calmer look. The story of the Ellen Austin is one of the oldest and strangest tales associated with this water, dating back, in various tellings, to the 1880s. The legend claims the Ellen Austin encountered a derelict ship, drifting and empty, somewhere in this region, placed a small prize crew aboard to sail it to port, and then lost that ship again in a storm along with its new crew, never to be seen again, sometimes repeating the encounter a second time in the same telling. The trouble for historians is that no reliable shipping record, insurance log, or newspaper account from the actual era has ever been located to confirm any of the story's specific details. No verified ship named Ellen Austin matching the account, no matching crew manifest, no matching date. This is one of the clearest examples in the entire legend of a story that has been repeated so often across so many books that its retelling has become mistaken for its evidence. Breathe in slowly and out. The Connemara 4 is a more recent and more verifiable case, a small pleasure yacht found drifting empty off Bermuda in 1955, its crew never located. Unlike the Ellen Austin, this incident is documented in contemporary records, and the most widely accepted explanation among researchers who have studied it is straightforward, if unglamorous. The yacht is believed to have broken free of its mooring during a hurricane that struck the region that same year, drifting for days or weeks afterward with no one aboard at all, meaning there may never have been a missing crew in the first place, simply an empty, unmoored boat found later, far from where it was last secured. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out slowly. The Raifuku Maru is another case worth clarifying calmly. This Japanese cargo ship sank in 1925, and for decades, retellings of the story claimed its final radio message was the dramatic phrase, "Danger, like a dagger now," suggesting something inexplicable and violent had befallen the ship. Maritime researchers who later examined the actual surviving radio records found a far more mundane explanation. The ship was caught in a severe storm, sent a distress call describing rough seas and a dangerous list to one side. And the dramatic phrasing appears to have emerged from a mistranslation or embellishment introduced much later by authors retelling the story, rather than from anything in the original transmission. A nearby ship, the American vessel Homer, attempted a rescue but was unable to reach the Raifuku Maru in time, in weather witnesses on both ships described consistently as an unusually violent storm. Breathe in slowly, and let it go. This region of the Atlantic and Caribbean, it's worth remembering, sits directly within one of the most active hurricane corridors in the Northern Hemisphere. The Atlantic hurricane season runs from June through November, and storms forming near the Cape Verde Islands off West Africa often track directly across this exact stretch of ocean on their way toward Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, or up the eastern seaboard of the United States. Before the era of satellite weather tracking, which only became reliable starting in the 1960s, a fast-forming or fast-moving storm could catch a ship or aircraft with little to no warning in open water, far from any coastal weather station capable of reporting it in time. Modern meteorology, supported by satellites, weather buoys and hurricane hunter aircraft that fly directly into storms to gather data, has changed this picture almost completely. Today, a tropical system forming anywhere in this region is tracked continuously, its position, strength and likely path updated every few hours and shared instantly with ships and aircraft throughout the area. The same ocean that once caught sailors by surprise decade after decade is now watched so closely that a storm capable of causing the kind of unexplained loss the legend describes would be almost impossible to miss coming, well before it ever became a danger. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly, completely. This is, in its own way, the quiet ending to the surface half of tonight's story. Every dramatic thread we followed, the ghost ship crews, the cryptic radio messages, the sudden compass failures, unravels gently into something more ordinary once it's examined directly against the record. Not because the losses weren't real, and not because the grief attached to them wasn't real, but because the ocean has never needed mystery to be dangerous, and has never needed a curse to occasionally take a ship, a plane, or a life in the middle of an ordinary, terrible storm. Let your whole body settle now, heavier into complete stillness, as we carry only the parts of this story worth keeping and continue our descent, deeper into the twilight water below. Breathe in slowly and let it go completely. Let's return briefly one last time to the surface legend, because there are a few final details worth holding gently before we finish our descent. The USS Cyclops, which we spoke of earlier, had two sister ships built to the exact same design, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus. Both of those ships were eventually decommissioned and sold, and both, remarkably, were later lost at sea themselves, in the very same general region of the Atlantic, during storms in the 1940s, decades after the Cyclops vanished. This coincidence, three sister ships from a single small class, all lost in roughly the same stretch of ocean, is exactly the kind of detail that keeps a legend alive. And it is also, when examined calmly, a reasonable illustration of how a single ship design sailing through a historically dangerous storm corridor for decades might simply be more vulnerable than most to the same kinds of Atlantic weather, again and again. Breathe in, slowly, and out. The Bahamas, near the western edge of the triangle, are also home to blue holes, deep, water-filled sinkholes formed in limestone, some connecting to extensive underwater cave systems. Dean's Blue Hole, the second deepest known blue hole in the world, drops more than 200 meters straight down, and these formations have added their own quieter thread to the region's mystery, simply because they are striking, unusual, and, until relatively recently, poorly mapped and rarely explored by anyone other than specialized cave divers. The United States Geological Survey, alongside NOAA, has stated clearly and repeatedly, across many decades of study, that there is no evidence of any unusual magnetic, geological, or supernatural force operating uniquely within the Bermuda Triangle. The agency's official position is, in essence, that the loss rate here reflects ordinary maritime risk, human error, and the region's specific geography and weather, and nothing more. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly, completely. So here is where we can rest, gently, in this understanding as we finish our descent tonight. The legend above us is built from real ships, real people, real grief, and real unanswered questions, softened over time by storytelling into something larger and stranger than any single explanation could account for on its own. And the truth, resting quietly beneath all of it this entire time, several kilometers down, has simply been a trench. Old, deep, geologically active, patiently shaped by forces that have never once needed a legend to justify their existence. Let your whole body settle, heavier now, into complete stillness. We are ready now for the very last part of our descent, and then, gently, for the question this entire journey has been leading toward. Before we finish our descent, let's take one last look at how this legend earned its name, and how it compares to other stories like it around the world, because the ocean, it turns out, has more than one triangle. The term Bermuda Triangle was first used in print by writer Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 magazine article, and it was popularized further by Charles Berlitz's best-selling 1974 book of the same name, which compiled decades of disappearances into a single, continuous narrative for the first time. Before this, most of these incidents were treated, quite reasonably, as separate, unconnected maritime tragedies, each with its own investigation, its own weather report, its own set of contributing factors. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Halfway around the world, sailors near Japan speak of a similar stretch of the Pacific, sometimes called the Dragon's Triangle, or the Devil's Sea, where fishing boats have reportedly vanished under similarly mysterious circumstances. Japan's government reportedly investigated the area in the 1950s after a string of losses, and, much like the Bermuda Triangle, found no conclusive unifying cause beyond ordinary hazards, difficult currents, and severe Pacific storms called typhoons. The persistence of these paired legends, one in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific, each centered on real losses, each eventually explained largely by ordinary maritime hazards, suggests something less about any one specific patch of ocean, and more about how humans have always related to the sea itself. It is vast, it is powerful, and for most of history it has kept its losses silent, offering searchers no wreckage, no explanation, no closure. In that silence, human imagination has always been ready to offer its own answer, usually a more dramatic one than the truth turns out to require. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly, completely. Tonight, we've tried to hold both of these things gently at the same time. The respect owed to real people who are genuinely lost, and the calm, factual understanding that the ocean beneath their final voyage was not cursed, only vast, only old, only doing what oceans have always done, quietly, without any need for a story to explain it. Let your whole body settle now heavier into complete stillness as we prepare for the very last steps of our descent, and the question this journey has been leading us toward all along. Let's rest a moment longer in this upper water, here around 100 meters before the light fades completely. The Sargasso Sea deserves a little more of our attention because it is one of the strangest ecosystems on the planet, and it sits directly beneath the most famous part of the legend above us. It is the only sea on Earth with no land boundary at all. Every other sea is defined by a coastline, but the Sargasso Sea is defined purely by ocean currents, a 2 million square mile lens of unusually still, unusually clear, nutrient-poor blue water held in place by the slow, clockwise rotation of the North Atlantic gyre. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Because the water here is so nutrient-poor, it is also exceptionally clear, some of the clearest open ocean water in the world, with visibility exceeding 60 meters in places. This clarity, combined with the floating mats of golden sargassum weed, creates a floating habitat, entirely its own, home to at least 10 species found nowhere else on Earth. The eel migration we mentioned earlier is worth returning to, because it remains one of the most patient mysteries in all of marine biology. Both the American eel and the European eel are born only here, in the Sargasso Sea, as tiny transparent larvae called leptocephali. Ocean currents carry them thousands of miles, the American larvae drifting toward the rivers of North America, the European larvae drifting even farther across the entire Atlantic toward the rivers of Europe. They spend years, sometimes over a decade, growing in freshwater rivers and lakes, far from the sea where they were born, before something triggers a final transformation. Their eyes enlarge, their digestive systems shut down entirely, their skin thickens and darkens for the ocean crossing ahead, and they swim, without eating again, back across the ocean, guided by senses scientists still do not fully understand, to this exact patch of water, to spawn once and die. No scientist has ever directly observed a wild eel spawning in the Sargasso Sea. It was theorized for decades before Danish researcher Johannes Schmidt spent nearly 2 decades in the early 20th century tracking progressively smaller eel larvae across the Atlantic to narrow down their birthplace, an investigation that itself reads like a mystery story, patiently solved not through legend, but through years of careful, unglamorous field work. Breathe in, hold gently, and out slowly. The Gulf Stream, which we mentioned already, is worth one more moment of attention too, because its power is almost impossible to overstate. It moves more water than all the rivers on Earth combined, many times over. It carries warmth from the tropics, far up the Atlantic coast and across to Western Europe, and its influence on regional climate is so significant that some studies suggest a slowing Gulf Stream could measurably cool parts of Europe, even as the wider planet warms. Rogue waves, another real phenomenon associated with this region, form when the Gulf Stream's fast-moving water interacts with opposing wind or swell, occasionally stacking wave energy into a single, unpredictable crest, sometimes reaching twice the height of the surrounding sea. For most of the 20th century, sailors' reports of these sudden, towering waves were treated skeptically by scientists, dismissed as exaggeration until 1995, when a laser-measured rogue wave nearly 26 meters tall was recorded striking an oil platform in the North Sea, finally confirming with hard instrumentation what generations of sailors had always insisted was real. A rogue wave striking a smaller vessel, especially at night in an era before satellite communication, could capsize a ship in seconds with no time for a distress call and very little debris left in a condition to be identified as the cause. This too is a modest, physical, well-documented explanation for at least some of the losses attributed to this water over the last century. Let your hands rest. Heavier now, completely still. We have spent a long while at the surface tonight, and rightly so, because this is where the legend lives. But the real depth, the real mystery, the one the ocean can actually show us, is still ahead. Let's continue down, now, into the twilight, at 10 meters. The light is still golden here, sunlight bending through the surface in long, shifting columns. This is the depth where the Sargasso Sea shows itself most clearly. Mats of golden-brown sargassum weed drifting on the current, each clump its own tiny floating world. Look closely, if you can, in your mind's eye. Tiny sargassum fish, camouflaged so completely as floating weed that they are almost impossible to see until they move. Sargassum crabs, sargassum shrimp, and juvenile sea turtles who spend the first years of their lives hidden in these floating rafts, drifting wherever the gyre takes them. Safe, for a while, from the larger predators of the open water. Eels come here too, though not to stay. The American eel and the European eel, born nowhere else on Earth but the Sargasso Sea, travel thousands of miles across the Atlantic as adults, from rivers in 2 different continents, just to spawn in this one patch of ocean and then die, leaving their young to drift back home on the current. A migration so strange it took scientists until the 20th century to even confirm where these eels were born. Breathe in, slowly, and out. At 20 meters, the water begins to cool just slightly. The gold above starts to soften into blue. This is still recreational diving depth, still within reach of sunlight, still full of familiar color. At 50 meters, blue deepens further. Reds are the first color to disappear at this depth, absorbed by the water above, which is why a cut on a diver's hand at 50 meters appears strangely green-black instead of red. The ocean is already beginning to edit what we're able to see, quietly, one wavelength at a time. At 100 meters, we are entering the last stretch of what's called the epipelagic zone, or the sunlight zone. Plankton is still abundant here, and where plankton is abundant, larger life follows. This is a layer where pilot whales, sailfish, and mahi-mahi hunt, all species common to these Caribbean and Atlantic waters, all indifferent to any legend humans have placed over their home. Let your shoulders drop one more time. At 150 meters, the light is fading fast now. What sunlight remains is a deep, dim blue, more felt than seen, like the last minutes of dusk stretched out and slowed down. At 200 meters, we cross into the twilight zone, the mesopelagic, and here the ocean changes its rules completely. 90% of all life in the ocean, by some estimates, exists in this twilight layer, hidden from view, rising toward the surface each night in what's called the Deal vertical migration, the largest migration of biomass on the entire planet, larger than the wildebeest of the Serengeti, larger than any migration on land, and it happens every single night, in silence, unseen by almost every human being who has ever lived. Lanternfish begin to appear here, small, silvery, covered in rows of light-producing organs called photophores. They use this light not to see, but to be seen, or specifically, not seen. matching the faint glow of the water above them so that predators looking up from below cannot make out their silhouette. This is called counter-illumination, and it is one of the ocean's oldest and most elegant forms of camouflage. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out. At this depth, we also begin to see the first traces of something you will hear about many times tonight: marine snow. Marine snow is not actually snow. It is a slow, constant, gentle fall of organic material, dead plankton, shed skin cells, fecal matter, tiny fragments of once living things clumping together and drifting down from the sunlit water above, feeding almost everything that lives below it. It falls constantly, silently, endlessly. A blizzard that never stops, that has never stopped, not for hundreds of millions of years. And it will be with us, drifting past us, for the rest of this journey. There is something worth resting on here at 200 meters before we continue. The Twilight Zone is the largest habitat on Earth by volume, and it remains one of the least explored. More humans have walked on the surface of the moon than have descended into the deepest parts of the ocean beneath us right now. Your body resting in your bed is farther from being fully explored in an ocean sense than you might expect. There is comfort in that, oddly. Comfort in how much of this world remains quiet, untouched, unhurried, unlit, much like the rest you are settling into right now. Let your breathing slow further, in and out, in and out. And let's continue down into the twilight, toward the place where the trench truly begins. At 300 meters, darkness is nearly complete now. Only the faintest whisper of blue remains above us, and within a few more meters, it will be gone entirely. This is where the hatchetfish live, flat, silver-sided, with eyes that point permanently upward, scanning the water above for the silhouette of prey against what little light remains. Their bodies are compressed almost to a blade's edge, an adaptation that, combined with their mirrored scales, makes them nearly invisible from the side. A second, different kind of camouflage from the lanternfish's counter-illumination evolved for the exact same problem: survive being seen. At 400 meters, the viperfish appears here, and it is worth pausing on, because it is one of the ocean's most striking predators. Needle-thin teeth so long they cannot fit inside its mouth, curving backward past its own eyes, useless for chewing but perfect for one purpose only: making sure that whatever it strikes never leaves alive. It has a photophore at the tip of a long spine on its dorsal fin, dangled forward over its own head like a fisherman's lure, glowing softly to draw curious prey close enough to strike. Breathe in, slowly, and out. At 500 meters, sperm whales pass through this depth and deeper on their hunting dives. They can descend over 2,000 meters in search of squid, holding their breath for up to 90 minutes at a time, their massive bodies built to withstand pressure that would crush a human chest in seconds. It was sperm whales, in fact, that gave humans some of our first indirect evidence of giant squid, decades before a live one was ever filmed, because sailors found sucker scars larger than dinner plates on the skin of whales that had surfaced from these very depths. Giant squid do live in the Atlantic, including in the waters above and around the Puerto Rico Trench. Architeuthis ducks, growing up to 13 meters in length, including its long feeding tentacles with eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes in the entire animal kingdom, built specifically to gather what little light exists at these crushing depths. At 600 meters, the water pressure here is already more than 60 times what you feel on the surface, and yet life continues, uninterrupted, adapted, calm in a way that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with belonging. At 700 meters, this is roughly the depth where oxygen becomes scarce in many parts of the ocean in a band called the oxygen minimum zone. Some creatures here have evolved to survive on remarkably little oxygen, slowing their metabolism, adapting their blood chemistry, existing in a kind of permanent, patient stillness. Breathe in, hold, and out slowly. At 800 meters, dragonfish drift past here, small but fiercely equipped, some species producing red bioluminescent light, a rare color in the deep sea, because most deep-sea animals have lost the ability to see red light at all, having evolved in a world where it never reaches. A dragonfish that can produce and see red light is in effect using a private wavelength, a secret channel invisible to nearly everything else in the water around it. At 900 meters, we are approaching the boundary of the Bath Epipelagic Zone, the midnight zone, where no sunlight has ever reached, not once, not for a single second since the ocean first filled this basin. At 1,000 meters, let this number settle for a moment. 1 kilometer of water above us. The weight of it is enormous, and yet, down here, everything has adapted to carry that weight without strain, the way your own body, right now, is learning to carry the weight of the day without strain, letting it go layer by layer, breath by breath. This is also geologically close to where the true story of the Puerto Rico Trench begins to take shape beneath us, because we are no longer just floating over open ocean, we are floating over the edge of one of the most active tectonic boundaries in the Atlantic. Let your hands go still, let your legs go heavy, and let's continue down into the midnight zone, toward the trench itself. Let's slow down here in the midnight water and look a little closer at who shares this darkness with us. The vampire squid lives at this depth throughout much of the world's ocean, including the deep Atlantic above and around the trench. Despite its name, it is not a predator in any dramatic sense. It does not hunt, it does not attack. It drifts gently, feeding on marine snow and the drifting detritus of the twilight and midnight zones, using long, sticky filaments instead of the grasping tentacles of its more aggressive relatives. Its name comes only from its dark, webbed arms, which it can turn inside out over its own body in a defensive posture, cloaking itself entirely, a soft, slow creature that has, through no fault of its own, been given the most frightening name in the entire ocean. Breathe in, slowly, and out. The cookie-cutter shark, small, rarely longer than 50 centimeters, migrates up through this water column each night as part of the same vertical migration we spoke of earlier. It feeds in an unusual way, latching onto much larger animals, whales, dolphins, even large fish, and twisting its body to remove a small, round plug of flesh, leaving a distinctive circular scar, then releasing its prey to swim on largely unharmed. Submarines in the 20th century occasionally surfaced with strange, round punctures in their rubber sonar domes. A mystery to naval engineers until researchers eventually confirmed the cause. Cookie-cutter sharks, mistaking the submarine's silhouette for prey in exactly this water. Siphonophores drift here too, more numerous and more strange than most people ever learn. These are not single animals, but colonies, thousands of specialized, genetically identical individuals fused together. Some functioning as feeding structures, others as swimming bells, others purely for reproduction, moving and hunting as one coordinated whole. The longest animal ever measured on Earth is a siphonophore, recorded in deep Australian waters at a length exceeding 40 meters, longer than a blue whale and yet built entirely of tissue so fine it is almost invisible until light catches it directly. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly. Comb jellies drift alongside them, propelled by rows of tiny, hair-like cilia that refract passing light into shifting rainbows, an effect called iridescence rather than true bioluminescence, though many comb jelly species produce their own light as well, glowing blue-green when disturbed. They are among the oldest surviving lineages of animal life on Earth, with a nervous system built on an entirely different architecture than nearly every other animal alive today, a separate experiment in what it means to be a nervous, feeling creature, run in parallel with our own for over 500 million years. There is a coelacanth, too, worth a brief mention here, though it favors rocky slopes and caves rather than open water. Once known only from fossils and believed extinct for 65 million years, a living coelacanth was pulled from a fishing net off the coast of South Africa in 1938. A discovery so significant it has been called the most important zoological find of the 20th century. Its cousins have since been found near the Comoro Islands and in Indonesian waters, a reminder that the ocean has, more than once, kept a species completely hidden from science for tens of millions of years, only to reveal it, once, by accident. Let your breathing slow further, in and out, in and out. All of these creatures, gentle or strange, ancient or newly discovered, share this same dark water, going about their lives with no awareness at all of the legend floating on the surface far above them. Their entire world is simply this: dark, cold, quiet, and, in its own way, complete. Let's continue down, now past 1,000 meters toward the geology waiting beneath us. At 1,200 meters, the anglerfish lives here, one of the most famous residents of the midnight zone, a lure of bioluminescent bacteria dangling above her mouth, a partnership between fish and microbes so old and so precise that neither could survive this depth without the other. Only the females carry this lure. The males, far smaller, exist almost entirely to find a female once, fuse to her body permanently, and share her bloodstream for the rest of their lives. It is strange, and it is also simply efficient. A solution evolved for a place where finding a mate at all in an endless dark is the hardest problem of all. Breathe in, slowly, and out, gently. At 1,400 meters, the gulper eel drifts here, a creature that looks almost more like a mistake than an animal. A mouth so enormous it seems to swallow its own body. An adaptation for a place where meals are rare and unpredictable, where an animal cannot afford to let an opportunity pass simply because it looked too big to eat. At 1,600 meters, marine snow continues to fall here, as it has at every depth so far, and as it will for the rest of our journey. Picture it now, pale flecks, drifting slowly, endlessly, catching what little light our imagined camera carries with it, disappearing below into the dark, feeding the layers beneath us, the way sleep, right now, is quietly feeding every part of you that the day wore down. At 1,800 meters, cold here is a constant, roughly 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, and it will stay almost exactly this cold for the rest of the descent all the way to the trench floor. The deep ocean does not have seasons. It does not have a Tuesday or a January, and down here there is only the temperature the water has always been, the pressure that has always been increasing, and the dark that has always been complete. At 2,000 meters, breathe in, hold it a moment and out slowly. We are now 2 kilometers below the warm, famous surface we started in tonight. And this is where the story of the Puerto Rico Trench begins to reveal itself properly in the shape of the seafloor beneath us. The Puerto Rico Trench sits along the boundary between two of Earth's great tectonic plates, the North American plate, which carries the entire floor of the Western Atlantic, and the Caribbean plate, a smaller plate wedged beneath the islands of the Caribbean Sea. These two plates do not meet gently. Along most of the trench, the North American plate is sliding underneath the Caribbean plate in a process called subduction, while in other sections the plates grind sideways past each other along transform faults, similar in mechanism, though far larger in scale, to California's San Andreas Fault. This grinding, sliding, colliding boundary is the reason the trench exists at all. As one plate is forced beneath the other, it drags the seafloor down with it, carving a long, curved scar in the ocean floor that stretches for over 800 kilometers, running roughly parallel to the northern coast of Puerto Rico. It is also the reason this region is one of the most seismically active in the Atlantic Basin. In October of 1918, an earthquake along this fault system, now remembered as the San Fermin earthquake, struck northwest of Puerto Rico with a magnitude estimated between 7.3 and 7.5. It triggered a tsunami that struck the island's western coast within minutes, killing dozens of people and reshaping how the region thought about the ocean beneath it forever. Let your breathing settle again. Slow. Even. Calm. This is not a frightening fact tonight, even though it may sound like one. It is simply the truth of how this trench was built and continues to be shaped, one small shift at a time, over millions of years. The same slow, patient forces that built the mountains you may have stood on, that built the very continents, are still quietly at work beneath this water, doing what they have always done, without hurry, without malice, simply following the rules of pressure and time. At 2,500 meters, we are fully within the Bath Yole zone now, on the upper slope that leads down into the trench proper. This seafloor is not flat, but ridged and folded, a direct visible record of the compression happening along the plate boundary. Sediment core samples taken from this region show layers of turbidite deposits, sudden underwater landslides triggered by seismic shaking, cascading down the slope and settling into the depths below, over and over, for thousands of years. Each layer a quiet record of one more tremor, one more shift. At 3,000 meters, Dumbo octopuses drift here, named for the ear-like fins on either side of their heads that they flap gently to move through the water, one of the few cephalopods that seem, to human eyes at least, almost impossibly gentle. They hover just above the seafloor, hunting worms and small crustaceans buried in the sediment, entirely unaffected by the tectonic violence written into the rock beneath them. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go. And let's continue down past 3,000 meters into the true abyssal plain that leads toward the trench itself. Let's pause here on this steep, tectonic slope and talk about the small number of people who have actually come this far down to see it directly. For most of the 20th century, as we mentioned, the Puerto Rico Trench existed only as a sounding on a chart, a number recorded by sound waves bouncing off a seafloor no human being had ever laid eyes on. The USS Milwaukee's 1939 survey gave the trench its modern name, but it would take decades of additional research cruises using increasingly precise multi-beam sonar systems to properly map the true shape of the trench and confirm its deepest point. Woods Hole. Oceanographic Institution, one of the world's leading centers for deep-sea research, has conducted multiple survey expeditions across this trench over the decades, using research vessels equipped with sonar systems capable of mapping the seafloor in far greater detail than the simple echo soundings of the 1930s. Their surveys helped confirm the trench's complex structure, the subduction zone to the south, the transform fault sections to the north and east, and the way these different types of plate boundaries meet and interact along the trench's length. Breathe in, slowly, and out. The most significant single achievement in this trench's exploration history came far more recently than most people expect. In 2018, financier and explorer Victor Vescovo led an ambitious project called the Five Deeps Expedition, with the stated goal of piloting a submersible to the deepest point of all 5 of the world's oceans within a single year. Something no person had ever attempted. His custom-built submersible, the DSV Limiting Factor, engineered specifically to withstand the crushing pressure of the very deepest ocean trenches, descended into the Puerto Rico Trench and reached the bottom of the Milwaukee Deep, becoming among the first crewed descents to this specific point in the Atlantic Ocean. The dive confirmed the trench's maximum depth with a precision no sonar survey alone could match, and Vescovo and his scientific team also collected sediment and water samples, along with visual documentation of the life found at these crushing depths, adding directly to what we now know about Hadal, snailfish, amphipods, and the sediment chemistry of the trench floor. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly. It is worth noting, gently, how recent all of this is. The deepest point of the entire Atlantic Ocean was not visually confirmed by human eyes in person until the final years of the 2010s. For nearly all of human history, and for the vast majority of the time since the Bermuda Triangle's legend first took hold in the public imagination, this trench sat completely unseen, unmeasured with any real precision, holding its exact depth as a genuine, unresolved unknown. Since that expedition, additional uncrewed remotely operated vehicles and autonomous underwater vehicles have continued surveying sections of the trench, gathering data on sediment composition, microbial life, and the ongoing seismic activity along the plate boundary. NOAA's Okeanos Explorer program has also conducted broader mapping and exploration missions throughout Caribbean and Atlantic waters in recent years, part of a wider, patient effort to fill in what remains one of the largest gaps in human geographic knowledge, the true floor of our own planet's ocean. Let your shoulders drop again, heavier still. There is something quietly moving in this if you let yourself sit with it. An entire, specific place, deeper than anywhere else in an entire ocean, existed in total obscurity, its exact nature unknown for the whole of recorded human history, and was only finally seen directly within your own lifetime, or close to it. The ocean keeps its secrets patiently, and reveals them only slowly on its own schedule, never in a hurry. The same way rest is arriving for you right now, slowly on its own schedule, not to be rushed. Let's continue down now toward the Hadal creatures waiting in the trench itself. Let's rest a little longer here, in the cold and the dark, and talk about the marine snow itself, because it deserves more of our attention than a passing mention. Marine snow was first properly described by a naturalist named William Beebe, who, in 1930 and 1934, descended off the coast of Bermuda, remarkably close to the very water this legend is named for, inside a small spherical steel chamber called a bathysphere, lowered on a cable from a surface ship. Beebe had no thrusters, no independent power, no way to move his vehicle at all except up and down along that single cable, and yet he became the first human being to observe, with his own eyes, the deep sea environment directly, describing bioluminescent creatures and this constant, gentle snowfall of drifting particles that he initially struggled to even name. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Marine snow is now understood to be one of the most important processes on the entire planet, not just in the ocean. It forms the backbone of what scientists call the biological pump, the process by which carbon from the atmosphere, absorbed by plankton at the surface through photosynthesis, is eventually carried down into the deep ocean as those plankton die, clump together, and sink. Some estimates suggest this process moves several billion tons of carbon from the surface to the deep ocean every single year, making marine snow, this quiet, unglamorous drift of dead material, one of the largest carbon storage mechanisms on Earth, quietly regulating the planet's climate in a process most people will live their whole lives without ever learning about. It takes, on average, anywhere from a few days to several weeks for a single particle of marine snow to complete its journey from the sunlit surface to the deep seafloor, depending on its size and density. Larger clumps, sometimes called marine snow aggregates, can be centimeters across and fall considerably faster than the fine, dust-like particles that take the longest, slowest routes down. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out slowly. There's a reason this deserves to be the signature image of tonight's journey. More than any single creature we've mentioned, marine snow connects every layer of the ocean into one continuous system, from the golden surface water, where the Bermuda Triangle's legend was born, all the way down to the Milwaukee Deep, over 8 kilometers below. Nothing down here exists in isolation from what happens above. The whole ocean is one slow, patient, continuous exchange, falling gently, without hurry, the same way your own breath tonight has been falling into a slower, gentler rhythm, one breath quietly feeding the next. It's worth pairing Beebe's story with one more, because it belongs here too. In 1960, 3 decades after Beebe's bathysphere dives, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh piloted a bathyscarf called the Trieste to the bottom of the Challenger Deep in the Pacific, at the time the deepest, confirmed dive in human history, deeper even than the Milwaukee Deep beneath us tonight. Their vehicle cracked a viewport on the way down from the pressure, and yet held, and they became, for decades, the only two people to have ever seen a Hadal trench floor directly, until Victor Vescovo's Five Deeps expedition over half a century later finally returned humans to these depths on a regular basis, including here, in the Puerto Rico Trench, in the very water settling around us right now. Let your whole body grow heavier, settling further into stillness. And let's continue gently toward the last few kilometers of our descent. At 3,500 meters, the abyssal plain stretches out around us here, vast and quiet, one of the flattest, most featureless landscapes on the entire planet, broken only by the occasional ridge, the occasional seamount, the occasional trench like the one we are descending toward. Xenophyophores live here, single-celled organisms that grow astonishingly large for something made of just one cell, some reaching the size of a dinner plate, building intricate shells out of sediment and mineral grains cemented together. Structures so complex, early researchers assumed they had to be built by many-celled animals. They are, in their own way, proof that even the simplest form of life, given enough time and enough patience, can build something remarkable. At 4,000 meters, the pressure here is over 400 times what you feel on the surface right now. 400 atmospheres pressing in from every direction, equally, constantly. And yet, sea cucumbers move across this seafloor without any apparent strain, soft-bodied, slow, methodically consuming sediment and digesting the organic material within it. The ocean's patient recyclers doing the same job in the same unhurried way every single day for longer than humans have existed as a species. Breathe in, hold it, gently, and out, slow. At 4,500 meters, marine snow is falling here too, as it has this entire journey, though by now it has traveled so far from the surface that what reaches this depth is mostly the toughest, most resistant material. The softer particles were consumed long before they arrived. What's left continues to drift down, patient, unbothered, feeding whatever waits below. There is something worth sitting with here, at 4.5 kilometers of depth. Every single snowflake of this marine snow began its journey at the sunlit surface, in the same warm water where the Bermuda Triangle ships once sailed. It takes weeks, sometimes months, for a single particle to complete this fall, and yet it always arrives. It never gives up partway down. It simply continues, slowly, until it reaches where it's going, much like sleep, arriving in its own time at its own pace if you simply let it keep falling. At 5,000 meters, we are now deeper than the average depth of the entire world's ocean, which sits at roughly 3,700 meters. Most of the planet's water column is already above us, and still we continue down. Grenadier fish, sometimes called rat-tails, are common at this depth throughout the Atlantic, their bodies tapering to a long, thin tail built for slow, energy-efficient movement across a landscape where food is scarce and every calorie matters. They have an extraordinary sense of smell and vibration detection, able to find a single carcass on the seafloor from remarkable distances in water this dark, where sight is nearly useless. Let your jaw loosen again. Let your hands rest, heavy and still. At 5,500 meters, The trench walls are beginning to steepen around us now, the flat abyssal plain giving way to the true descent into the Puerto Rico Trench proper. This is where the seafloor stops being a plain and starts being a canyon carved by the same tectonic forces we spoke of at 2,000 meters, still working, still patient, still unhurried. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go. And let's continue, down toward 6,000 meters, toward the beginning of the Hadal zone, the deepest classification the ocean has. Let's stay a moment longer with the light down here, because so much of what we've passed tonight makes its own, and it's worth understanding gently how. Bioluminescence is produced through a chemical reaction between a molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. When they combine in the presence of oxygen, they release energy in the form of light rather than heat, an extraordinarily efficient process, almost all of the energy converted directly to light, compared to an incandescent bulb on the surface, which wastes most of its energy as heat instead. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Nearly every major group of animals in the deep ocean has evolved this ability independently, again and again, over hundreds of millions of years, a process called convergent evolution, where the same useful trait arises separately in unrelated lineages simply because it solves the same problem so well. Jellyfish, squid, fish, worms, even certain species of shark have each independently discovered some version of the same basic chemistry, tuned slightly differently for their own purpose. Some jellyfish use bioluminescence purely as a defense, a strategy researchers call the burglar alarm. When disturbed by a predator, the jellyfish flashes brightly and repeatedly, not to harm the attacker, but to attract the attention of something larger, a bigger predator drawn to the light, who may then attack whatever was threatening the jellyfish in the first place, turning a moment of danger into a call for help answered by the ocean itself. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly. Ostracods, tiny crustaceans sometimes called sea fireflies, produce a brilliant blue bioluminescent cloud when threatened, so bright that sailors in the Pacific during the Second World War reportedly used crushed ostracods to read maps at night, without giving away their position with an electric light, a strange, small piece of natural history hidden inside a much larger one. In Caribbean waters, not far from the surface legend we spoke of earlier tonight, flashlight fish live in reef caves and emerge only at night, each carrying a pouch beneath its eye filled with bioluminescent bacteria, which it can rotate or cover with a small flap of skin, blinking its own living light on and off at will, using it to signal to others of its kind, to confuse predators, and to hunt the small plankton drawn toward the glow. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go, completely. Scientists estimate that as much as 90% of all animals living below 200 meters produce light in some form, meaning that darkness down here is far less absolute than it first appears. It is less an absence of light altogether, and more a private, living light generated by the creatures themselves, meant only for each other, in a world where the sun's light gave up trying to reach a long, long time ago. Let your body settle further, heavier, into stillness, into this same private, gentle dark, and let's continue our descent toward the final stretch of trench beneath us. Let's return for a moment to the geology beneath us, because it holds one more piece of this story worth understanding calmly before we go further. The boundary between the North American plate and the Caribbean plate changes character along the length of the Puerto Rico Trench, and that change matters. In the western and central sections, north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, the North American plate is being forced down and beneath the Caribbean plate in true subduction. The ocean floor bending downward into the Earth's mantle at a shallow angle. Further east and along parts of the northern edge, the motion becomes more of a sideways, grinding, transform motion, plates sliding past one another rather than one diving beneath the other, similar in mechanism, though larger in scale, to California's famous San Andreas Fault. Breathe in, slowly, and out. This mixture of subduction and transform motion is part of why earthquakes in this region can behave somewhat differently from the earthquakes generated by simpler, single-mechanism boundaries elsewhere. The 1918 San Fermin earthquake we mentioned earlier, along with several other significant historical earthquakes in this region, has led modern seismologists and tsunami researchers to treat the Puerto Rico Trench as a genuine hazard zone, not just for the island of Puerto Rico itself, but potentially for a much wider stretch of the Caribbean, and even, in a large enough event, the southeastern coast of the United States. The United States Geological Survey and NOAA jointly maintain seismic monitoring stations and a network of deep ocean tsunami detection buoys, part of a system called DART, Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis, positioned at strategic points across the Atlantic and Caribbean, specifically to detect a tsunami wave generated by an event along this trench, or others like it, within minutes of it forming, giving coastal communities as much warning as science can currently provide. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out. Slowly. None of this is meant to unsettle you tonight. Quite the opposite. It is meant to show you that the ocean's real dangers, the ones worth taking seriously, are not vague or supernatural at all. They are specific, measurable, monitored continuously by dedicated scientists, and understood today far better than at any other point in human history. The same patient, careful attention that lets us understand this trench's geology is the same attention that keeps coastal communities safer, quietly, every single day, whether or not anyone above the water ever thinks about it. There is something almost comforting in that thought, if you let it settle. The ocean's real forces are being watched carefully by people whose entire job is to notice what the rest of us don't have to, which means you, resting right now, don't need to hold any of this yourself. You can simply let it go and rest. Let your breathing slow further, in and out, in and out. And let's continue down gently toward the very last part of our descent. At 6,000 meters, we cross now into the Hadal zone, named for Hades, the ancient Greek underworld. It is a fitting name and also, in its own way, an unfair one, because this is not a place of punishment or torment. It is simply the deepest layer the ocean has, found only in trenches like this one, covering less than 1% of the entire seafloor, and yet home to creatures found nowhere else on Earth. The pressure here is staggering, over 600 atmospheres. Every square inch of surface at this depth carries roughly 6 tons of force pressing inward. A human body, unprotected, would be crushed instantly and completely. And yet, this is exactly where Hadal's snailfish choose to live and thrive, in numbers that surprised the scientists who first found them, Breathe in, slowly, and out. Hadal snailfish are soft-bodied, almost gelatinous, pale pink or translucent, with no scales and very little skeletal structure at all. Their softness is not a weakness here, it is the adaptation itself. A rigid, air-filled body, like a human's, would be crushed by this pressure, but a body made almost entirely of water and soft tissue, with no air pockets to compress, simply yields to the pressure evenly from every side, and continues functioning as if nothing unusual were happening at all. Inside their cells, and inside nearly every Hadal creature's cells, a molecule called TMAO, trimethylamine N-oxide, accumulates in concentrations that increase with depth. TMAO works as what scientists call a piezolyte, stabilizing the proteins inside a cell against a distorting force of extreme pressure, keeping them folded correctly, keeping them working when the pressure alone would otherwise crush their molecular structure into uselessness. Researchers have found that the concentration of TMAO in Hadal fish increases so predictably with depth that, in theory, there is a calculable pressure at which even this remarkable adaptation would fail. Some scientists estimate that limit sits somewhere between 8 and 8,500 meters, which is almost exactly how deep we are about to go. At 6,500 meters, amphipods swarm here in numbers that can seem almost impossible for such a barren, food-scarce environment. Small, shrimp-like scavengers, some no larger than your fingernail, others in the deepest trenches, growing unusually large in a phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism, possibly linked to the cold, the pressure, and the scarcity of predators at these depths. They gather almost instantly around any carcass that falls from above, a whale fall, a fish, anything at all, stripping it down to bone within hours, in a place where a single meal might need to sustain a population for months. Breathe in, hold gently, and out slowly. At 7,000 meters, this is roughly the depth at which the Puerto Rico Trench itself was first properly surveyed. In 1939, the USS Milwaukee, a US Navy light cruiser, conducted a sounding survey of this trench using early echo sounding equipment and recorded a depth that, at the time, was among the deepest ever measured in the Atlantic Ocean. The trench's deepest point still carries the ship's name today, the Milwaukee Deep. It would be decades before more precise instruments confirmed the true maximum depth, and decades more before any vessel, crewed or unmanned, actually reached the bottom to see it directly. For most of the 20th century, this trench was known only as a number on a chart, a depth recorded by sound bouncing off a seafloor no human eye had ever seen. Let your body settle a little heavier into the bed beneath you. And let's continue down past 7,000 meters toward the very floor of the trench, toward the Milwaukee Deep itself. Let's stay a little longer here in the Hadal water, because this layer, more than any other on our journey, has only recently begun to reveal what actually lives inside it. Giant isopods, close relatives of the small pill bugs and woodlice you might find under a garden stone, grow to a startling size in deep water throughout the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, some specimens reaching over 30 centimeters in length. This is deep-sea gigantism, At work again, the same phenomenon we touched on with amphipods, and scientists still debate its exact cause, though the leading explanations point to the cold water slowing metabolism, allowing a longer lifespan and more time to grow, combined with the scarcity of predators at these depths, removing much of the evolutionary pressure to stay small. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Giant isopods can survive remarkably long periods without food, sometimes years, by slowing their metabolism to a near standstill between rare, enormous meals, a strategy suited perfectly to an environment where a single whale fall or large carcass might be the only significant food source to arrive in months. When food does appear, they consume it with a speed and thoroughness that seems almost at odds with their patient, slow existence between meals, a reminder that patience and appetite are not opposites down here, but simply two settings on the very same body. The food web at these Hadal depths is almost entirely dependent on what falls from above. Marine snow sustains the smallest organisms, sediment feeders like sea cucumbers and worms process the seafloor itself, and larger, rarer falls, a dead fish, a piece of a whale, sustain scavengers like amphipods and isopods, in short, intense bursts of activity. There is no photosynthesis here, no plants, no algae, nothing that draws energy directly from light, because light has not existed at any point on our journey since we passed roughly 1,000 meters. Every single calorie of energy at this depth, with the rare exception of chemosynthetic microbial mats near certain vents and seeps, ultimately traces back to the sun, filtered down, slowly, patiently, through nearly 8.5 kilometers of water, arriving finally as this quiet, constant snowfall. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly, completely. Researchers studying Hadal trenches around the world, including the Puerto Rico Trench, have found that these deep environments are not, as once assumed, empty or lifeless, simply because they are remote and difficult to study. Trenches instead appear to concentrate organic material, funneled downward by their steep walls in a way flatter abyssal plains do not. Meaning, some Hadal trench floors actually support more biomass relative to their surroundings than the abyssal plains sitting just above them. The deepest, most crushing, most hostile seeming layer of the ocean may, in its own quiet way, be one of its more productive corners. Let your whole body settle, heavier now, into stillness. We are close now to the very bottom. Let's continue gently down toward the Milwaukee Deep itself. Let's slow down here again and talk about what happens when something enormous finally reaches this floor, because it is one of the most remarkable events in the entire deep ocean. When a whale dies far from shore, its body eventually sinks, and if it reaches depths like the ones surrounding us tonight, it creates what scientists call a whale fall, an isolated, temporary ecosystem unlike almost anything else on Earth. Researchers who have studied whale falls describe them unfolding in 3 distinct, overlapping stages. Breathe in, slowly, and out. In the first stage, called the mobile scavenger stage, sleeper sharks, hagfish, and amphipods arrive quickly, sometimes within hours, drawn by the scent of such an enormous, sudden meal, and can strip a whale carcass of soft tissue in a matter of months, an intense, concentrated feeding event in an environment where food this abundant might otherwise never appear again in a single scavenger's lifetime. In the second stage, the enrichment opportunist stage, smaller worms, crustaceans, and mollusks move into the enriched sediment surrounding the skeleton, feeding on the organic material left behind, sometimes for 1 to 2 years. In the third and longest stage, the sulfophilic stage, bacteria break down the fats remaining within the whale's bones themselves, releasing hydrogen sulfide, which in turn supports entire colonies of specialized worms, including bone-eating ossidax worms, sometimes nicknamed zombie worms, which have no mouth or stomach at all and instead bore directly into the bone using a root-like structure, hosting bacteria inside their own bodies that digest the whale's fat for them. This final stage can last for decades, an entire slow-motion ecosystem built from a single death, sustaining generations of specialized creatures found almost nowhere else in the ocean. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly, completely. There is something quietly profound in this if you let it settle. Even an ending down here becomes a beginning for something else, patiently, without waste, without hurry, exactly the way the entire deep ocean seems to operate, turning every event, no matter how large or how final it seems, into simply the next stage of something continuing. Let your body rest a little heavier, and let's continue toward the last part of our journey. Let's meet a few more of the creatures who share this Atlantic water with the legend above us, because their stories are stranger and gentler than most people ever learn. The oarfish lives at these depths throughout much of the world's oceans, including here in the Atlantic, and it is the longest bony fish known to science. Some individuals measured at over 8 meters in length, silver-bodied, ribbon-thin, with a bright red dorsal fin running the entire length of its body like a crown. In Japanese folklore, the oarfish is sometimes called the messenger from the sea god's palace and is said to rise to the surface before earthquakes, a legend that modern seismologists have investigated seriously rather than dismissed outright. Though the current scientific consensus remains that there is no confirmed, reliable link between oarfish surfacing and earthquake activity, simply a striking coincidence repeated often enough across enough centuries to become its own quiet legend, not unlike the one resting on the water high above us tonight. Breathe in slowly and out. The goblin shark lives in deep Atlantic waters as well, rarely seen alive, distinguished by a long, flattened snout and a jaw that can extend forward with remarkable speed to snatch prey. A slingshot mechanism that has earned it comparisons to almost nothing else in the animal kingdom. It is sometimes called a living fossil, its lineage stretching back over 120 million years with relatively little change. A shark that was already ancient when the first flowering plants appeared on land. The long-nosed lancetfish drifts through this same water, growing over 2 meters long with a sail-like dorsal fin and a body so fragile and gelatinous that it begins to break down almost immediately after death, which is part of why it remains poorly studied, despite being caught, incidentally, by fishing vessels across the Atlantic and Pacific far more often than almost any other deep-sea fish. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly. Each of these creatures, ancient, strange, rarely seen, has been living quietly in this water for longer than the Bermuda Triangle has existed as an idea, longer than ships have sailed above them, simply continuing unaffected the way the ocean itself continues, unaffected by whatever stories are told about it on the surface. Let your breathing settle again, slow and even, and let's continue toward the final stretch of our descent. Let's take one more moment here near the trench floor to understand how this specific scar in the ocean compares to the others scattered across our planet, because the ocean, it turns out, holds many trenches, and each one is its own separate, isolated world. The Puerto Rico Trench at 8,376 meters at its deepest point, the Milwaukee Deep, is the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean, but it is not the deepest point on Earth. That distinction belongs to the Challenger Deep, within the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific, which plunges to nearly 10,935 meters, over 2.5 kilometers deeper than the water surrounding us right now. The Tonga Trench and the Kermadec Trench, both also in the Pacific, exceed 10,000 meters as well, placing the Puerto Rico Trench outside the very deepest handful of trenches worldwide, and yet still holding a singular, specific title all its own: the deepest place in an entire enormous ocean. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Each of these trenches, isolated from the others by thousands of kilometers of shallower ocean, functions almost like its own separate island of extreme depth, and this isolation has produced a remarkable pattern that researchers have only recently begun to fully document. Many Hadal species appear to be endemic, meaning they exist in only one single trench and nowhere else on the planet. Having evolved in complete isolation from their relatives in other trenches for millions of years, the same way species on separate oceanic islands evolve into their own unique forms, cut off entirely from other populations of their kind. This means the specific species of snailfish, amphipod, and microbial life found here in the Milwaukee Deep may genuinely exist nowhere else in the entire world. An entire branch of life's diversity confined permanently to a single narrow scar in the Atlantic seafloor, never mixing with its closest relatives resting in the Mariana Trench or the Kermadec Trench or any other Hadal environment on Earth. It is one of the most striking examples of isolation producing diversity that the ocean has to offer, and it is happening in complete silence, several kilometers beneath the surface legend we spent so much of tonight discussing. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out slowly, completely. There is something worth sitting with here gently as we near the very bottom of our journey. An entire, unique world found nowhere else has existed quietly beneath this one patch of ocean for millions of years, patient, undisturbed, asking nothing of the surface above it, needing nothing from it, simply continuing the way rest is continuing to arrive in you right now, gently, in its own time, needing nothing from you either, except permission. Let your whole body settle heavier now into stillness as we prepare for the very last steps toward the Milwaukee Deep. Let's linger here just a little longer in this final stretch before the trench floor, because there are still a few threads of this story worth gathering gently together. Cold seeps are found in parts of the deep Atlantic and Caribbean, similar in principle to the methane hydrate deposits we discussed much earlier in tonight's journey. At a cold seep, methane and other hydrocarbons leak slowly from the seafloor without the extreme heat of a volcanic hydrothermal vent, and specialized bacteria that can metabolize this methane form the base of an entirely separate food web, one that draws its energy not from sunlight and not even from marine snow falling from above, but directly from the chemistry of the Earth itself. Tube worms, clams, and mussels living at these seeps often host these bacteria directly inside their own tissue, in a partnership so complete that many of these host animals have no functioning digestive system of their own at all, relying entirely on their bacterial partners for nourishment. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Bacteria capable of surviving and even thriving under the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches are called piezophiles, from the Greek word for pressure, some piezophilic bacteria recovered from Hadal's sediment samples during expeditions like Victor Vescovo's Five Deeps project are so specifically adapted to extreme pressure that they cannot grow properly at surface pressure at all. Brought up to the sunlit world into a laboratory at 1 atmosphere, they simply stop functioning. The opposite problem a human diver faces, a life so completely suited to depth that shallow water becomes, for them, the hostile and impossible place. It is worth pausing on that thought for a moment gently. An organism perfectly at home in total darkness, at 400 times the pressure you are resting under right now, for whom our world, the world of light and air and gentle pressure, would be the uninhabitable one. Every environment, it turns out, is simply home to something, provided that something has had enough time and enough patience to adapt to it. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly. There is also something quietly human running through this water alongside all of this ancient biology, telecommunications cables carrying a significant share of the internet traffic and phone calls between North America, the Caribbean, and beyond run along sections of the Atlantic seafloor near this trench system, following careful routes surveyed in advance to avoid the steepest, most seismically active sections wherever possible. The first successful transatlantic telegraph cable was laid in 1858 connecting Ireland to Newfoundland, and it functioned for only a few weeks before failing. A reminder of just how difficult and how recent our relationship with the deep sea floor of the Atlantic actually is, even in matters as ordinary today as sending a message across an ocean. Modern engineering has occasionally tested itself against pressures similar to what exists at the depths we've travelled through tonight. Most military submarines have a crush depth somewhere in the range of several hundred to just over 1,000 meters, meaning the vast majority of tonight's journey, everything below roughly 1 kilometer, exists at pressures that would destroy even the most heavily reinforced crewed vessels built for ordinary naval use. Only a small number of highly specialized submersibles purpose-built with pressure hulls made from titanium or ceramic composites have ever been engineered to survive the full weight of water resting above the Milwaukee deep. Breathe in slowly and let it go completely. We have carried a great deal down with us tonight: history, geology, biology, chemistry, and the quiet, patient engineering of creatures and instruments alike, all built in their own way to survive or simply to belong in this water. Let all of that settle now, gently, the way marine snow settles, the way sediment settles, the way your own body has been settling layer by layer this entire time. We are ready now at last for the question this whole descent has been leading us toward. Let's pause once more in these final moments before our full ascent and meet a handful of the ocean's quietest, oldest residents, the ones who rarely appear in any story about this water, but who have outlasted nearly everything else we've discussed tonight. Black corals grow on seamounts and steep slopes throughout the deep Atlantic, including formations near the edges of the Puerto Rico Trench system, and they are, remarkably, among the oldest living animals on Earth. Researchers using radiocarbon dating have found individual black coral colonies in deep Atlantic waters estimated to be over 4,000 years old, meaning some of these corals were already centuries old when the pyramids of Giza were being built and have simply continued growing a few centimeters every 100 years through the entire span of human recorded history, indifferent to every empire, every ship, every legend that has passed above them. Breathe in slowly and out. Glass sponges live in similar deep habitats, building skeletons entirely out of silica, the same basic material as glass, in structures so intricate and so mathematically precise that engineers have studied their lattice patterns for inspiration in designing stronger, lighter human architecture. Some glass sponge species are estimated to live for over 10,000 years, making them, quite possibly, among the oldest living individual organisms of any kind on the entire planet, older than any tree, older than any land animal, older than agriculture itself. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly. Seamounts, underwater mountains that never quite reach the surface, rise from the seafloor throughout this region of the Atlantic, remnants of ancient volcanic activity tied to the same tectonic forces that built the trench beneath us. These seamounts often support a surprising density of life compared to the surrounding open ocean floor, acting as isolated islands of hard, elevated seafloor that corals, sponges and fish can colonize, creating small, rich ecosystems scattered across an otherwise sparse abyssal landscape, not unlike oases rising unexpectedly from a vast, quiet desert. The blunt-nosed six-gill shark also passes through these deep Atlantic waters, one of the oldest surviving shark lineages with a skeletal structure and gill arrangement that has changed remarkably little in over 150 million years. It spends much of the day resting at great depth, sometimes below 1,000 meters, rising only at night to hunt in shallower water, its own quiet vertical migration echoing the same daily rhythm, followed by the lanternfish and amphipods far above the depths it usually prefers. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go completely. There is a certain comfort in resting alongside creatures like these tonight, even in imagination only. A coral older than most nations, a sponge older than agriculture, a shark whose basic form has outlasted the rise and fall of countless species around it. All of them simply continuing, patiently, unhurried, asking nothing of the world above them, needing no legend, no explanation, no urgency at all, just time and stillness, and enough patience to keep existing one slow year after another. Let your whole body settle heavier now into complete stillness, the way these ancient, patient creatures have settled into their own long, unhurried lives. And now, at last, let's rise, slowly, gently, all the way back to the surface and towards sleep. Let's take one more quiet moment, still resting near the trench floor, to look a little closer at the compass, because it remains one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire legend, and it deserves a fuller, calmer explanation before we rise Magnetic declination is the technical name for the difference between true north, the direction toward the geographic North Pole, and magnetic north, the direction a compass needle actually points, toward the wandering magnetic pole located at any given time somewhere in the Canadian Arctic, slowly drifting year by year due to shifting currents deep within the Earth's molten outer core. Breathe in, slowly, and out. In most parts of the world, this difference is significant enough that sailors and pilots must actively correct for it, adding or subtracting a specific number of degrees from their compass reading depending on their exact location, a routine calculation taught in every basic navigation course, but along a specific curving line that runs through the Western Atlantic, including a significant portion of the Bermuda Triangle, this declination briefly drops to zero, meaning true north and magnetic north align almost perfectly, and a compass here points to the actual pole without requiring any correction at all. For an experienced, properly trained navigator, this is a helpful, well-documented feature of the region, not a hazard, but for a less experienced pilot or sailor, particularly one who had learned to always apply a correction out of habit, crossing into this zero declination zone could produce a real, measurable navigational error because they may have applied a correction that was no longer needed, effectively steering themselves in the wrong direction while trusting their compass completely. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out slowly. This single, well-understood magnetic quirk, combined with the powerful, fast-moving Gulf Stream capable of pushing a drifting vessel many miles off course in a single hour, and the historically poor radar and radio coverage over open ocean before the 1970s, accounts for a meaningful share of the navigational confusion described in incidents throughout this region's history. It is a modest explanation built from geophysics and ordinary human habit rather than anything supernatural, and it is, for that reason, far less exciting than the legend, though no less true. There is one more detail worth sharing here because it closes this thread so neatly. The zero declination line is not unique to the Bermuda Triangle at all. It exists in several places around the globe, tracing a long curving path across parts of the Pacific and elsewhere, wherever the Earth's shifting magnetic field happens to align with true geographic north at this particular moment in our planet's history. It will not remain in exactly this position forever either. The magnetic pole continues to drift slowly, a few dozen kilometers a year, meaning that in centuries to come, this same alignment may shift entirely away from this stretch of the Atlantic, taking one more thread of the legend along with it quietly. The way the ocean resolves so many of its own mysteries eventually, patiently, without any drama at all. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go, completely. Let your whole body rest, heavier now, into stillness, carrying only what feels calm and settled from everything we've gathered tonight. And now, truly, let's begin our full rise back through the water, back toward the light, and towards sleep. Before we rise, let's hold one last piece of history gently, because it explains how we came to know anything at all about the deep Atlantic beneath this legend. The HMS Challenger expedition between 1872 and 1876 was the first true scientific survey of the world's oceans. A converted British warship stripped of most of its weapons and fitted instead with laboratories, dredging equipment, and thousands of meters of sounding rope. Over nearly 4 years, its crew and scientists traveled almost 70,000 nautical miles, taking depth soundings, water samples, and dredging specimens from the seafloor at hundreds of locations across the globe, discovering thousands of new species in the process, and effectively founding the entire modern science of oceanography. Breathe in, slowly, and out. Before the Challenger expedition, many scientists believed no life could exist at extreme ocean depths at all, an idea sometimes called the azoic hypothesis, proposed seriously in the mid-1800s by naturalist Edward Forbes, who theorized that pressure below roughly 500 fathoms would make life impossible. The Challenger's dredges, pulling up living creatures from far greater depths than that, disproved this idea conclusively, opening the question of just how deep life could actually reach, a question we are still answering today, one expedition, one submersible dive, one sediment sample at a time, all the way down to the piezophilic bacteria found resting in trenches like the one beneath us tonight. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out slowly. Sound-in technology in the Challenger's era relied entirely on lowering weighted rope over the side of the ship and measuring how much played out before it went slack, a slow, laborious process that could take hours for a single deep reading and was easily thrown off by ocean currents pulling the rope sideways rather than straight down. It was not until the development of echo sounding in the early 20th century, using sound waves timed as they traveled to the seafloor and back, that oceanographers gained the ability to measure ocean depth quickly and accurately across vast distances, the same basic technology, refined many times over, that eventually allowed the USS Milwaukee to properly chart the trench that now carries its name in 1939. Every advance in this story, rope soundings, echo sounders, multi-beam sonar, crude bathyspheres, and finally pressure-hardened submersibles capable of reaching the very floor of the Milwaukee Deep, represents the same simple, patient, human effort, repeated across nearly a century and a half, reaching a little further into the dark, a little more carefully each time, to see what has always been there, waiting, whether or not anyone was watching. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go completely. That patience is worth carrying with you now into your own rest tonight. You don't need to solve anything or discover anything or reach any particular depth of sleep by force. You only need to keep going gently, the way each of these expeditions did, one small step at a time, trusting that rest, like the ocean floor itself, is already there, waiting patiently, ready to be reached simply by continuing slowly, without hurry. Let your whole body settle, heavier now, completely still. And now, truly, gently, let's rise all the way back to the surface and into sleep. Before we reach the very bottom, let's sit with one more truth, gently, because it matters more than almost anything else we've discussed tonight. For most of human history and even today, we have mapped the surface of the Moon and of Mars in far greater detail than we have mapped the floor of our own ocean. As recently as the early 2020s, researchers estimated that only around 20 to 25% of the global seafloor had been mapped using modern high-resolution sonar, meaning the vast majority of the ocean floor, including large sections surrounding the trench we are resting above right now, remained known only through older, far less precise measurements, or not measured in detail at all. Breathe in, slowly, and out. An international project called Seabed 2030, a collaboration between the Nippon Foundation and the General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans, has set out to map the entire ocean floor to modern standards by the year 2030, compiling data from research vessels, naval surveys, and even commercial shipping sonar from around the world into a single unified map. It is, in a very real sense, one of the last great cartographic projects humanity has left to complete about our own planet, and it remains, even now, unfinished. This means that somewhere, in the folds and ridges of trenches like this one, in canyons and seamounts scattered across ocean floors worldwide, there are almost certainly geological features and quite possibly entire species that no human being has ever seen, measured, or named. Not because they are hidden by any legend or mystery, but simply because the ocean is enormous and the work of measuring it carefully, patiently, one sonar ping at a time, is still very much underway. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out, slowly, completely. There is something worth holding on to in this gently as we finish our descent tonight. It is entirely possible, entirely reasonable to hold both truths at once. That the Bermuda Triangle above us is not a place of supernatural danger, explained calmly by ordinary maritime risk and simple physics, and that the ocean itself, including the trench beneath it, still holds genuine unresolved unknowns, waiting patiently for someone someday to measure them properly. The mystery was never gone. It simply moved quietly from the realm of ships and compasses into the realm of unmapped seafloor and unnamed species, which is in its own way a far more honest kind of mystery than the one the legend told. Let your whole body settle now, completely, heavier than it has been at any point tonight, and let's take the very last steps down together to the floor of the Milwaukee Deep. At 7,500 meters, the trench walls rise steeply around us now on either side, like the sides of a canyon carved not by water and wind, as canyons on land are, but by the grinding of two tectonic plates over tens of millions of years. The walls here are made of sediment and ancient oceanic crust, folded and faulted by the same forces that occasionally send tremors up through the water above. The same forces once responsible for the 1918 tsunami we spoke of earlier, still working patiently, this very moment, far too slowly for us to ever feel it directly. Breathe in, slowly, and out, gently. At 8,000 meters, we are deeper here than the summit of Everest is tall. If you placed the tallest mountain on Earth into this trench, its peak would still sit beneath more than a kilometer of water above it. The scale of this is difficult to hold in the mind, and you don't need to hold it perfectly. Just let the number settle, the way everything else has settled, slow and heavy. Life continues even here. Foraminifera, single-celled organisms with intricate mineral shells, have been found in sediment samples from this exact depth, along with tiny worms and microbial mats that draw energy not from sunlight, which has not existed at any point on this entire journey, but from chemical processes in the sediment itself, an entirely separate food web from the one most life on Earth depends on, quietly operating in total darkness at pressures that would kill nearly everything on the surface within moments. At 8,200 meters, we are close now. The trench floor is just below us, the deepest sediment in the entire Atlantic Ocean, undisturbed for enormous stretches of time, settling particle by particle, the very last stop for marine snow that began falling weeks ago from the sunlit water where we started tonight. Breathe in, hold it a moment longer, and release slowly. At 8,376 meters, the Milwaukee Deep. We have arrived at the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. The seafloor here is soft, fine sediment, undisturbed except by the occasional slow drift of a sea cucumber or the passing shadow of an amphipod. The water above presses down with a force of over 800 atmospheres. Complete darkness, complete cold, just above freezing, has surrounded this exact spot for millions of years, uninterrupted, unwitnessed, until modern instruments finally allowed us to measure it, and far more recently, to see it. It is worth resting here for a moment in the stillness of this exact place. This is the deepest the entire Atlantic Ocean goes, deeper than the wrecks of the Titanic, deeper than the USS Cyclops could have possibly sunk, deeper by a wide margin than any story ever told about the Bermuda Triangle above us required its mysteries to reach. And yet it has simply been here the entire time, doing nothing more dramatic than existing patiently in the dark, while ships sailed and legends grew in the sunlit water more than 8 kilometers above. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go, completely. Let your whole body go still now, here at the deepest point of our journey. There is nowhere further to go, nothing left to reach for, just this stillness, this quiet, this dark, held gently around you the way rest is holding you right now. Let's rest here a while in this deep, unhurried water and talk for a moment about what is happening inside your own body right now, because it mirrors, almost exactly, the journey we've been taking together. When your body begins to relax this deeply, your nervous system shifts from what's called the sympathetic state, the alert, active, fight or flight mode that carries you through your day, into the parasympathetic state, the rest and digest mode, where your heart rate slows, your muscles release their tension, and your breathing deepens and lengthens on its own without you needing to manage it at all. Breathe in, slowly, and out. This shift is not something you have to force. It happens naturally, the way pressure naturally increases with depth, the way marine snow naturally falls without needing to be told to fall, simply because the conditions are right for it. Every long, slow breath you've taken tonight has been quietly signaling to your own nervous system that it's safe to let go a little further, the same way each meter of this descent has quietly taken us further from the noise and light of the surface and closer to a stillness that has always been here, waiting patiently, underneath everything. There is a reason total darkness and cold, still water feel restful, rather than frightening once you stop resisting them. The human body evolved expecting darkness to mean safety, a time to rest, a time when the day's demands finally loosen their grip. The deep ocean has simply always lived inside that same darkness, permanently, and has never needed to fear it, because down here there was never anything to be alert against in the first place, only patience and pressure and time. Breathe in, hold it gently, and out, slowly, completely. Let that same permission settle over you now. You do not need to be alert anymore tonight. You do not need to hold on to anything. You are simply sinking gently, the way everything in this water has been sinking with us, unhurried, unafraid, held completely by the water all around it. And let's continue, together, toward the very last stretch of this journey. We are here now, at the very bottom, the Milwaukee Deep, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Let's ask the question this whole journey has been leading toward, honestly and quietly, the way the ocean itself would ask it. Is it possible that the Bermuda Triangle still hides something science hasn't fully explained? Breathe in, slowly, and out. The honest answer, the one the evidence actually supports, is more measured than the legend and also, in its own way, more remarkable. No, there is no credible evidence of any single unifying force, magnetic, supernatural, or otherwise, causing an unusual rate of disappearance within this specific triangle of ocean. The United States Coast Guard NOAA and Lloyd's of London have each, independently, over decades, reached the same conclusion. Ordinary maritime risk, concentrated shipping and flight traffic, the Sargasso Sea's becalming stillness, the Gulf Stream's powerful and sometimes disorienting current, the region's genuine agonic line affecting uncorrected compasses, sudden tropical storms, and the simple, ordinary difficulty of finding wreckage in deep, open ocean before the era of satellite tracking together account for the losses attributed to this water. And yet, that is not quite the same as saying the ocean beneath this legend holds no mystery left at all. Breathe in, hold it a moment, and out slowly. The Puerto Rico Trench, sitting directly beneath the triangle's southern edge, was only visually confirmed by human eyes within the last several years, when Victor Vescovo's 5 Deeps expedition finally reached the floor of the Milwaukee Deep in a submersible built specifically to survive its pressure. Before that dive, this exact spot, the deepest point in an entire ocean, existed only as a number on a chart, unseen, unphotographed, essentially unknown in any direct sense. And even now, only a small fraction of the trench's full length, over 800 kilometers of seafloor, has been surveyed in the kind of detail modern science considers thorough. Somewhere along those unexamined stretches of trench wall, in sediment that has never been sampled, there may be species of Hadal snailfish, amphipod, or microbial life entirely unknown to science, isolated for millions of years, existing quietly, needing no discovery to justify their existence, waiting only for someone someday, with the right instrument and the right patience, to finally notice them. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go. So the mystery was never really gone, it simply changed shape, the way it so often does in the deep ocean. It moved from the realm of vanished ships and spinning compasses, dramatic and immediate, into the quieter, slower realm of unmapped trench walls and undiscovered species, patient and largely invisible, unfolding at the pace of scientific surveys rather than headlines. There is something worth carrying with you into sleep from this thought. The ocean does not need a legend to remain genuinely mysterious. The honest, careful, scientific version of this story, the one built from Coast Guard reports and sediment cores and a single submersible dive in 2018, is, in its own quiet way, just as strange and just as worth wondering about as anything the old stories ever claimed. We still don't know everything that lives in the deepest folds of this trench. We may not know for a very long time, and that more than any legend, is the real, honest mystery the Bermuda Triangle and the Puerto Rico Trench leave us with tonight. Breathe in slowly, hold, and release completely. Let that mystery rest gently now, unresolved, the way so much of the ocean remains unresolved, patiently, without needing an answer tonight or any night soon. And now let's begin our journey back, slowly, gently, up toward the surface and toward sleep. Slowly now, let's rise. Leave the Milwaukee deep behind us, leave the trench floor and the tectonic plates still grinding, patiently, far beneath where we're headed now. Breathe in, slowly, and out. At 6,000 meters, we rise up out of the Hadal zone, past the snailfish, past the amphipods, past the last of the trench walls folding away into darkness behind us. At 4,000 meters, the abyssal plain stretches out and then falls away below. The sea cucumbers, the xenophyphores, the manganese nodules all settling back into stillness, undisturbed, exactly as they were before we arrived. Breathe in slowly and let it go. At 2,000 meters, the water is still black here, still cold, but we are rising, steadily, gently, leaving the trench and its ancient patience behind us, carrying only what we learned, nothing more. At 1,000 meters, marine snow drifts past us here, falling the opposite way we're moving, each flake continuing its own slow journey downward, unconcerned with ours. Breathe in and out. At 500 meters, a last faint trace of blue begins to appear far above, the twilight zone welcoming us back gently, the way it welcomed us down hours ago. At 200 meters, blue deepens into something softer, something warmer. The sunlit water is close now. Breathe in slowly. At 100 meters, gold begins to touch the water again. The sargasso weed drifts above us. The surface is close. At 50 meters, warm, quiet, calm. At 20 meters, almost there. Breathe out slowly. At 10 meters, light, surface, rest. And now, the surface. You are here, safe, floating gently. The whole journey behind you now. You are safe, completely safe. Your body is heavy, your breathing is slow, your mind is quiet. There's nothing left to do tonight, nothing to solve, nothing to remember. Just this stillness, just this rest. The ocean will keep its secrets, patiently, the way it always has. The trench will still be there tomorrow. The legend will still be there tomorrow. But you don't need to carry either one right now. Just let go. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders fall. Let your hands rest, open and still. Let your breathing slow, in and out, in and out. Sleep. If you have not already, sleep. You are safe. You are held. The dark is gentle here. The water is still. Sleep. Follow Unseen Ocean History for more deep ocean mysteries.